Well, good morning, everybody. It's Bill High. I'm here in sunny Kansas City today, and we are really glad that you have joined us for this webinar. So we're going to have a great full morning for you. And just as a quick word of encouragement, let me remind you that God is still on the throne. He's working, and we are encouraged that you took some time to join us today. Our webinar is really just about understanding the times. Now, past week, a couple of weeks, as our country has gone into this virtual shelter in place kind of place, we have hosted phone calls and webinars. A couple of weeks ago, we did a webinar for the nonprofit world. Over 300 nonprofits joined us. Just last week, we did a webinar for just about 130 plus financial advisors. And this week, we're doing this webinar for you all, people who work with us, know us, and we just wanted to give you a little bit of understanding of what the times are, but also some encouragement for your soul. So we've got a whole host of speakers lined up today. We're going to move pretty quickly. They're going to introduce themselves. And just as a big frame of reference, part of our question that we're trying to answer for you all is what's going on. Even this morning, I got a phone call or an email rather from a guy who said, hey, can you tell me what's going to happen with the markets? And we're going to attempt to give you some perspective on all those things and give you some hope as well. But one of the things before I get started, I did want to point out to you that there's a Q&A function that you can tap on, and as we go along, feel free to ask any questions that you'd like, and at the end of the presentation, then we will be sure to get to those questions as well. There's a chat feature as well that you can tap into. And if you've got anything that's we're going along that you'd just like to chat about, also feel free to jump into that. But go ahead and make sure that you're aware of that button. And as we go along, tap into those, and we'll be glad to move into this. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you to Jeff Mannion. He's a senior teaching pastor at Ada Bible Church. But Jeff, why don't you come on and give us a little bit of message here of hope?
Sure. My wife, Chris, and I, we are in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the church that we served for 35 years. And I just get to spend a second today talking about a place that I've called the land between. And this space called the land between is where tens of millions of Americans find themselves right now. And it's undesired, often uninvited space. And so just where you're sitting now, I know that so many of you are concerned about how, the markets have plummeted, and how is this going to affect, future plans that you had. Well, welcome to the land between. It's business owners who had to furlough employees trying to figure out, when do I bring people back? Who do I bring back, and in what timing? And it's the working mom and dad with offices closed and schools closed, and now trying to simultaneously work from home while transition into a homeschool parent of perhaps marginally uncooperative children. And so this space, this land between space, this undesired space, I love to use a geographic kind of a map to show you where you are whenever you find yourself in this space. And there it is. It says you are here. And that is the Sinai Desert. And it's where the Israelites found themselves after the Exodus. Now, Egypt is off to one side, Canaan is off to the other. And the Lord appears to Moses at the burning bush and says, I'm concerned about the situation, and I will bring my people out of the land of slavery and into the land of promise. And there at the burning bush, it's just like in one sentence, out of and into, and nothing was said about the desert that was in between. And that's where the Israelites are in the terrain that they had to navigate. And I believe that what was happening in the desert for the Israelites was, I believe that they were enrolled in trust school. When they exit Egypt, they don't exit Egypt as a well-ordered group of obedient God followers. When they exit Egypt as an unruly mob of ex-slaves indoctrinated in generations of Egyptian idol worship. And here they are on the way to Canaan, on the way to the promised land, where they're going to have to represent this invisible God of the universe. And I don't think they know him. And I don't think they trust him. And that was part of the purpose of the desert. It seems like the question that their Lord kept asking was, will you trust me here? Will you trust me to lead you? Will you trust me to guide you? Will you trust me to provide water when you run out of water? Will you trust me to provide food when you run out of food? Will you trust me? Will you trust me? The land between, this undesired space, this desert space, my friends, it's trust school. And I believe it is what our gracious God has wanted since the beginning of time, to be trusted, particularly in our seasons of waiting and hardship and uncertainty. So I was reminded of David in Psalm chapter 13, where 4 times in 2 verses, he asks the question, how long? He starts, how long, O Lord, you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And then he goes, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts? How long will my enemy triumph over me? And he's just waiting and waiting and waiting. But Psalm 13 is just like 6 verses long. In the first 2 verses, we have this, how long, how long, how long, how long. The last 2 verses, verse 5 begins, but I will trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. And he goes, I will sing to the Lord because he has been good to me. But just those powerful words, but I trust, but I trust. And his situation has not fixed itself yet. He's still in the waiting room. I think he's still confused. And he says, but I trust. And so I believe that one of the best prayers that can come out of the land between is just for us to re-up and say, God, I trust you in this space. I don't like this space. I don't want this space. I don't understand this space, but I will trust you in this space. Or perhaps the prayer, God, help me to learn to trust you in this space. Bill asked me to offer kind of a devotional of hope. And I think the hope here is this. The hope is that the terrain that we despise the most is a greenhouse for our spiritual growth. The space that we despise is where God does some of his best work. And it's where he desires to do some of his deepest work in you. And so may our gracious God provide everything that you need when you need it. May this season be a season where you thrive in the land between.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Andy Ward, and I just want to continue on in this conversation, really talking about what tends to steal our hope, which is fear. I'm a clinical psychologist practicing out of the Atlanta area. I also run a separate leadership consulting firm. In addition, I also do some work in the family office space, work alongside a lot of financial planners across the country when they're dealing with very complex family systems with high net worth family systems in particular. Sometimes they just need someone that can provide some collaborative perspective on that. And I'm going to be speaking to you about something that is very near and dear to me, which is how to be resilient in the midst of dealing with fear. You know, just a little bit of observation. I find that these are unprecedented times. I'm not only seeing this personally, but even professionally, in speaking with many of my colleagues, it's a common consensus that we've not seen anything like this. The impact that it's having on the family system, on individuals, on businesses. And so I just want to take a little bit of time to really address how can we deal with this emotion that we call fear. I think it needs to start in a place of definition. There's lots of definitions out there about fear, but I really like this one, which says, fear is a powerful and unpleasant reaction caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous or threatening. And as you can see there, the operant word in all of that is the word belief. We are a moderating variable, meaning fear comes through us and it taps into our own belief system, very much like what was just said. Do we believe that God is trustworthy? that he can walk us through this? Or do we tend to trust and believe in financial security and our efforts to get through this? Belief is such a vital thing to really wrap our heads around with regards to whether something is going to be fearful or it allows us to be resilient. I believe that fear is actually a part of normal living. Our brains are actually designed to experience this thing called fear. It's the way God created us. It's very much related to the stress process. And we typically think of fear as just simply an emotion, but I'm actually here to say there's three components to fear. Yes, it still is the emotional state that can rob us of peace in the moment, but it's also a cognitive process, meaning our thoughts are impacted by a sense of fear. We now know, do a lot of research, that when people are under fear, they tend to think very rigidly in very black and white terms. And that's a way to actually engender a sense of security. But the problem is that we may not always make decisions in a wise factor when we're under the influence of this thing called fear. And certainly we know it's physical, meaning our body keeps score. If we're experiencing fear, it's going to impact how we experience anything from our sleeping or eating. We get more headaches. And so fear is very powerful. But despite its power, I believe fear is also protective in this sense. Whenever any of us are feeling that powerful notion of fear, I think we should all pause and actually begin the introspective process. What exactly am I scared of? Because if we can actually start to name what it is we're scared of, sometimes we realize, oh, maybe I have some actions that I need to take, but sometimes we can be scared of the boogeyman, scared of something that has not quite happened. And so naming our fear is very important. I think what's unique about the fear we're navigating now, though, is that ultimately everyone's facing it, right? This isn't regional. I cannot think of a single soul in this country who isn't being impacted by fear in some capacity. And it certainly doesn't help that the media is reinforcing its seriousness 24/7. I actually made a personal boundary with myself about a week ago. I stopped watching network news to get my news. I'm actually reading it only. The added benefit of that is I get to stop and start when I want. And I also get to skip over things that are overly sensational, because I realized whenever I was watching the news, I never walked away feeling blessed. I always walked away with an elevated sense of anxiety and fear. And so that's just something I've done to cope with this. Obviously, what we're dealing with has global implications. We are in a global economy, and certainly what happens across the world is influencing us and vice versa. And I just think the mere fact that all of our lives have been disrupted really speaks to how serious this is. And that can certainly lead to more fear. And lastly, I just think in our modern world, right, we rely a lot upon our science, our medical advances, but I think we're learning that sometimes we're not as far down this road as we think we are. Our sense of security can be rocked to the core. And it's really, in many ways, stripping away a lot of our false idols that we have in our life. As I've kind of just watched an evolution over the past 4 weeks, which really is not a big picture of time, I've seen kind of this interesting progression of feelings. Certainly, when we heard about COVID-19 internationally, I know I was in the camp of, wow, that's really bad for China, but what does that mean for us over here? But as we began to see how virulent this is and how quickly it can spread, people now moved into a sense of hysteria. We were out buying and clearing off the shelves of everything. And even in some cases, people are still resistant to see the seriousness of this issue. I now think just over the last few weeks, we've moved more into a sense of, again, just kind of a fear of, I don't know where this is going to go. But in some cases, people have adjusted. They've shown some resistance and resilience, meaning that they're understanding we're in this for the long haul, and I can make choices now that can help me cope. So practically, as we look at this whole process, here's just some very simple things that I'd like to convey, but frankly, ones that I think can be helpful in addressing this sense of fear. Number one, I think it's actually very healthy to move from a sense of fear to concern. I think it's healthy to have concern because concern can now lead us to action steps. What do I have to take serious in all of this? And being in a state of denial will not help us, but fear can be a paralytic. It can get us in a sense of emotional concrete, then we can't make good decisions. So just choosing to move from fear to concern is a good first step. I think number two, and boy, I have to take this one a lot, this advice, but we need to move from move away from worst case scenario thinking. There's over 60 years of research that psychologically, when people are up against something that has an uncertain end, we tend to have worst case scenario thinking. We visualize it. We almost see it like a movie screen in our head. And we now know that the brain has a hard time distinguishing between what's imagined versus what's real. So if you're visualizing all this worst case scenario thinking, it's gonna show up in what you feel. And again, it's gonna affect you physically. You know, one of my favorite all-time quotes is from Mark Twain, and he said this near the end of his life. He said, "I am an old man, and I have known a great many trials and tribulations in life, most of which never came true." Now, that's a very profound statement. What it's saying is that ultimately, sometimes what we fear in life can happen, but most of the time, what we fear the most doesn't come to pass. And by the way, Mark Twain was someone who lost children and his spouse in death before his own, and he even experienced financial ruin. So he's somewhat of an authority to keep us grounded to avoid this worst case scenario thinking. At the very least, have some best case scenario thinking or even mixed case to compete with it internally. I think a third thing we can do is just remind ourselves of history. You know, 100% of the time in history, pandemics end, markets come back, right? Things do tend to get better. Are they different? Yeah, perhaps. But history is a good reminder that our present situation won't be indefinite. I think another thing we can do is just accept the challenges we're facing rather than resist them. There's an old saying, and this saying is over 2,000 years old, but it says, whatever you resist, persists. Meaning, when we're in a state of denial or we're just not willing to face the state that we're in, including the challenges, we now know due to research, you are much more likely to suffer from the difficult emotions attached to that than if just accepting this is my reality, Lord help me. And last one, perhaps this goes without saying, but I really think we need to grow in our sense of empathy for those around us who are being affected by this. You know, again, there's an old saying I'm a big believer in, but people don't care what you think until they think that you care. I think just showing more empathy to those, which is really a form of showing love, as it says in 1 John, it's a way to cast out fear by showing that you care. Just some practical things that we all can do to just move from, again, fear to resiliency. Guys, thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it over to my friend David now.
Hey, Andy, let me jump in here for just a minute because you are a perfect lead in to David to talk about the markets. But I do want to come back to your point too there about moving from worst case scenario thinking.
Yes.
And I've just felt like it was important to stop and pause for a second here and let you camp out on that point a little bit, because if people are listening to the news and watching all that's going on, it's easy to live in that place of that worst case scenario thinking. So how would you encourage them to actually live that out, to not go to that place?
Well, if you can identify sources that are speaking the worst case scenario thinking, limit it. Number one, again, just like I did with the news, just be more judicious about how much you're consuming of the worst case scenario thinking around you. I think we all need friends, family, and advisors who can give us an alternative narrative to think on. So if you can't get out of your own stinking thinking, right, your own head, then ask for someone else to say, hey, help me think this through, right? Give me a best case scenario. I'm having a hard time going there, but help me understand what that might look like, sound like, etc. We need other people's input to get there from time to time. But I still think ultimately we have the responsibility of challenging our own thinking. Again, this is what the Apostle Paul says, when we are to take our thoughts captive, right? He didn't realize it, but he was being an excellent psychologist. Left to our own devices, we're going to be negative, pessimistic, cynical, and we have to be willing to challenge our own thinking. But sometimes we just might need some help in that.
Yeah, good advice. Thank you, Andy. One thing that we've done at the Signatory, we've encouraged everybody on the team to have a buddy. Have a buddy that you can just talk to and say, let me tell you how I'm feeling today, and just in that moment. So really good advice. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Beatty out of Boston. David, talk to us about the markets.
Be glad to. Yeah, I lead 2 companies in wealth management and investments. I'm really pleased to be with you today. Talk about this time of crisis, about the markets, and about ourselves and how we respond to it. And what I have to talk about follows really well on what you outlined, Andy. First of all, I just want to acknowledge things may not get back to normal. That's reality. You saw the invitation for the webinar, and you saw me with a clean-shaven face. I haven't had a beard in like 20 years. And one of these virus beards, bad name, but one of these coronavirus beards. So will I shave it off? Will it go back to normal? I don't know. Maybe my wife probably does know, but we don't know what's going to go back to normal here and what will not. And that really is an important question for all of us to be asking for our country, our families, our businesses, our charities. Will things go back to normal? How may they be different? And we don't want to be pessimistic here, but we want to be really realistic. And this is a crisis that is both sudden and extreme. And it shows up in a lot of ways. We can talk about that medically. I will talk about it economically. It's by far the biggest jump in unemployment that we've seen in history. It jumped to over 3 million, over 6 million, and this week again over 6 million. So fast. It's also the fastest move we've ever had from a bull to a bear market. I'm jumping to the third one. The last time it moved even close to it this fast was the 29 market crash, nearly a century ago. And here it is, this time in only 16 trading days. And what that means is merely that the market is dropped by 20% or more. The equity markets have dropped by 20% or more. So fast, so sudden. And along with that, the highest stock market volatility in history. A little more than the 2008 financial crisis, which also was extreme. Those are just indicators of what a massive impact is in front of us, and we're all still trying to grapple with it. And we don't know how it will turn out. The first place is to be realistic and to say there's a lot we do not know. And that's been part of the healthy conversation around the medical side, is to acknowledge what we know and what we don't know. We don't know the denominator. We don't really know the death rate, because we don't know how many are infected, and etc. What do we know and what do we not know? And we have to say the harm is real, the way out is uncertain, and it's really appropriate to be concerned. And that's not saying fearful, but following on Andy's comments, the concern is very appropriate here. So the next question is, how do we put ourselves in the best situation to assess things realistically? Andy's saying he's modifying his own monitoring his own emotional reactions by turning off the videos and managing his input of information. He wants to remain informed, but to do so in a way that's sober. It's just so natural that people are slow to recognize the new and then slow to embrace it in a healthy way. And that's happened. We've just all observed it in the world, in our country, how the response is come. I have a personal example there. My father died on March 8th, just recently, and he'd had a long battle with Parkinson's, and his death was a very graceful one, and it was just, our family handled it beautifully. I have much to be thankful for. But what happened in that following week is we set up a service just 6 days later on March 14th. And I had to go back to my family who was in the middle of grief and say, should we postpone the service? And they were in the middle of grief and weren't dealing with this. I kind of had to, because I was leading a business and had to pull our people into anticipating what was going to happen and to be prepared for it. But churches hadn't closed, and I'm coming to my family and saying, should we postpone the service? It was just such a hard conversation. They handled it beautifully. And by the next day they were saying, yeah, we can't put anyone at risk. We really have to postpone the service. And they were all just so ready to do it. So it was a beautiful and really fast reaction. But that's not what often happens. It's not easy to embrace the new and to adjust in a healthy way. We have seen how financial advisors have responded to the crisis, and we can already look back and see, just almost put a blanket statement that there was not good anticipation of how devastating the economic impacts would be and how the markets would react. Why wasn't there better anticipation? We can ask those questions, but it's where we are right now. It's so easy to underestimate risks. There's the one side of, we don't want to drown in our worst case scenario thinking, like Andy says. It's exactly right. We don't want to do that. But we also don't want to underestimate the risks. We want to be making sober decisions based on the facts. I put up here a reference to Factfulness. That's a book, and I'll show it to you. Here's a Factfulness, published in 2018. And I'm really talking about the markets, but I'm bringing up a book that's about global poverty. Al's going to talk in a moment. Maybe Al knows this book. If your family is charitably inclined and thinking about how you have an impact on global charity, this book's really good. It helps you get out of kind of long-term thinking about just us and them and how different it is. Poverty globally has changed massively in recent decades, and for the better, in a way that most people don't realize. And there's a reason why there's this lack of change. This book could really help you not only understand global poverty and how it's changed, but also it gets into a lot of these cognitive biases and how we absorb change in the world. The book has the straight line instinct. A lot of these, you can just imagine what they mean. Straight line thinking. We think it's going to stay like it is. The fear instinct, the size instinct, the blame instinct, and the urgency instinct. A lot of these have parallels, analogies in how a person responds to the markets. The urgency instinct is exactly what is heightened in times of stress like this. We feel like we're under attack, and we're so concerned about survival in the moment and our response. And it's exactly when we have under stress, when it's so tough to make good decisions. And the urgency instinct, the implication for looking at the markets, is that, and in my technical financial advisor language, it elevates your discount rate. You have a hard time investing for the future. You're so concerned about survival in the present. And you can make bad decisions that way. So how do you acknowledge that human tendency, that bias you have, so you can still make good decisions in these moments that we're in of stress? If we look to the literature around cognitive biases, there could be a whole seminar on that, and you could read on it. You can even just look it up on Wikipedia and get educated on some of them. In investing, there's two major categories. It'd be the overconfidence bias and the loss aversion bias. And you think of bull and bear, greed and fear. The overconfidence bias is just really being too certain about how things will be in the future. And there's embedded in that confirmation bias, recency bias, herding bias, there's others. And on the other side, we have the loss aversion, which is okay to be averse to losses, but what it really is a hypersensitivity to loss. And especially in times of stress like these, that becomes elevated. So by knowing those human tendencies, you can be more ready to make good decisions, because there are not only threats in investing right now, there are also opportunities. And by being aware of these things, you can be ready. The slide just changed on know yourself. It really is about knowing yourself. Let me add, before I do that, mention my firm Daintree. Our tagline is "See the forest," because we think that's really our summary statement of how we work well with clients. Because if we can help them not only just see the trees in front of them, but step back and have perspective for the long term about their goals and priorities and the resources deployed to attain them. If they can have that perspective, when times of stress like this come, they're ready. Having that perspective is what you need. And you actually do that best, not in the time of stress, but anticipate it. So when clients come to us now, we're referring back to the plans they set when the stress was low and they had time to attend to it, the time of sobriety versus now. And so we've had some clients come and say, I just want to sell all my equities. We've actually had none this time around that have done that. 2 who came close, none who have. And talking to other advisors, there are some, they're having mostly the same experience. There's some clients who have chosen to really blanket sell into the market, but not a lot. And that says something about the time we're in. Let me go back to the slide here. Know yourself is a deeply spiritual concept. It's not just something that helps you in getting along in your family or a time of crisis or how to invest well. It's a concept for life. And Calvin's Institutes, I'll refer to. This is one of my favorite references. I have to admit, I haven't read all of Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. I have read all of Factfulness, but I haven't read, and all the Charts and Graphs, but I haven't read all of Calvin's Institutes. It starts off with a sentence, wisdom is. And what do you think it says? Maybe Jeff will know. It says, wisdom is knowing God, but it says more. That sounds right. Wisdom is knowing God. It says, wisdom is knowing God and knowing yourself. And Calvin doesn't put one in front of the other. He says, you cannot know God without knowing yourself. And you cannot know yourself without knowing God. So as we consider these things, we really do need to know ourselves, how that applies here, and how you respond to this market crisis. How are your investments doing? One of the practical things you can do is not only go back to that plan. What did I say I would do in a time of crisis? We anticipated this. We've modeled what it looks like when the market goes down by 50%, a lot more than it's gone down here. What did you say in the time of your sobriety? But we also, look back. How did you behave in the 2008 financial crisis? How did you and your spouse respond together? And then how did you, reflecting back on it, what do you learn from that? How does it inform how you respond in this time? We find that really helpful. And when you do that, it's amazing how oftentimes just peace settles on the room. There's perspective. And your thinking moves from just short-term thinking to long-term thinking. And you tame those cognitive biases, you tame those fear responses that you have. I may be running out of time. I would move here to talk about how you work with your financial advisor. Bill, is that good enough for now? Bill. I think
David, just kind of to that fourth point there, working with your financial advisor, I know that one of the questions that has come up repeatedly to me, and so I'm going to put you out there, but it's this question of, okay, so we know we're in a period of shutdown, but a lot of the industry is saying, well, we still think that the market's going to come back because there's not a lot of places to put capital. But is that fourth quarter? Is that third quarter? Give us any perspective specific to that.
a lot of clients I find tend to put it into when will the market turn and I should put money back in, or when will, and I just want to encourage people that mental framework doesn't work, because you cannot call the bottom of the market. You can say when things are getting cheaper or more expensive, and you can choose to put part of your available capital back. My caution right now is we went down 34% domestic equity markets. We're net, and it's come back very rapidly. We had 16 days to a bear market. We're most of the way back toward a bull market, and I think it's not going to go that fast, and we could test lows again. So first thing I would say is I don't know. Don't put all your bets on knowing. So be humble about it. I'll leave it at that.
That's good. Execute the plan is a lot of what I hear. So
yes.
Very good. So we're going to move now to Al Moeller. Al, I want you to talk a little bit about, there's a lot of fear in the nonprofit world. We've had a lot of that conversation, and some aren't going to make it. Some churches we know aren't going to make it. So talk a little bit about, to this group of people, what they can be looking at.
Well, thank you, Bill. I think you have a slide. Okay. We just have one slide. And so Excellence in Giving's been around since 2002 and have helped families place about $500 million with nonprofits. And last year, about $67 million went to almost 800 different nonprofits. So we've got a pretty good spot to look at who's going to come out ahead and who's going to be a loser in this scenario. And I'll just take you down through this one chart, because the losers in the nonprofit sector, you could just say ministry sector, are going to be ones with weak leaders. And if they don't have a strong executive leadership team and a strong board, they're not going to fare very well in this economic downturn. And I would say that had a conversation yesterday with someone, and his definition of a leader, a good leader in a nonprofit space, and maybe in any space, was someone who would define reality and give hope. It's a balance between looking at the reality and also being hopeful. And this nonprofit leader that I was speaking with, I asked him if he had a plan, and he was willing to say that he had a plan. He's going to cut some things, right away. He's got a plan that'll cut some more, and then he's got a final plan that is like a survival plan. And I was really impressed that he and his board had worked through that already. I think that he'll come out in any economic scenario, ahead. I also think that if you have a concentrated funding base, we look very carefully at how large a percentage a single donor is for a ministry. If they have a diversified funding base, they're gonna do a lot better. I mean, if you're concentrated right now and all your donors are from the energy sector, Dave mentioned the market coming down, and a lot of our clients are in the energy sector. So the month of March, energy prices came down 50%. So that would be a bear market by any measure. And if you're funders for your ministry, we're all energy related people, you're gonna have a tough time seeing their giving stay at the level that it's been in the past. We're also concerned that ministries some of them have a very, thin financial reserves. If you don't have solid financial reserves, you're going to have to start cutting staff and other expenses right away. And so the financial situation, sometimes we've thought in the past that organizations maybe have had too much financial reserves, but in this situation, those are going the solid financial reserve position is going to help them weather this storm. And I think it'd be good to, as a donor, I assume all the people on this call today are donors, you might ask your favorite ministry or favorite nonprofit what their plan is. And someone, they said that he hopes that nonprofits will present a plan and not a plea, because a plea doesn't make sense to a business person who is also having to make plans for downsizing their business or having to do with less financial resources, that sort of thing. So hopefully when you ask your favorite nonprofit what their plan is, they'll have something to give you. Also, I think in the loser category are ministries that are event driven. In this environment, quite a few ministries have had to postpone events. And some of those are pretty significant revenue generators for the ministry. And I don't think they have very many options for replacing those. I guess time will tell on that. But if you're an event-driven ministry rather than a relationship-driven ministry, you're probably not going to fare very well in this environment. And in terms of a relationship-driven ministry, we're encouraging the ministries to ask their donor, understand from their donors if their ministry in particular is an A-list ministry for that donor. Some of them are trying to do some assessments on how their donors' own financial situations are faring. I think that's going to be a lot harder. But if they can understand, if you're a top ministry for a donor, if you're in the 1 to 3 or possibly 1 to 5 category, then you as a donor consider that ministry an A-list ministry. And in tough times, you're probably going to do your very best to try and keep going with that ministry. You'll give as much, maybe even more, to those A-list ministries. B-list ministries, maybe the same, a little less. And what we've seen historically is that if you're in a below number 7 or number 10 on a donor's list, you're probably a C-list ministry for that donor, and you're going to just get dropped. So that's going to be painful. Moving down the list there, right now, I think if you're an international focused ministry, and there are a lot of needs overseas, particularly in Africa with the combination of the locusts and COVID starting up over there. But if you're an international ministry, you're going to struggle. I mean, the community ministries right now are getting a lot more funding. The U.S. ministries are going to be a lot, local communities for sure, and U.S. Secondly are going to be, I think, beneficiaries at the moment. Funding is going to shift that direction. Focus on spiritual needs. I think that, again, versus meeting physical needs, I think right now, if you're trying to someone to say, we need more money to distribute Bibles or train pastors or some other thing purely versus meeting someone's physical needs for food, clothing, shelter, I think you're going to have a harder time getting an ask and a positive response from that. And then finally, on this list, if you lack an online delivery for your ministry, you're going to really struggle. Conversely, if you have online delivery and communications, you could benefit. A church in New York that we're called Church of the City, just listen to their story. Next week after Easter, they're going to start running Alpha online every night of the week. That's incredible. I mean, when ministries can actually accelerate in this economic downturn because they have online delivery. A church up in Denver, we're based in Colorado Springs, but a church up in Denver, they're a large church, have multi-site. On a good week, even an Easter week, they probably have 12,000 people. And last week they had 20,000 people tune into their online service. So online delivery, online communication right now, and we're also quarantined and isolated is a really important distinction between the winners and the losers. And then, finally, I'd like to just share, like, a news story that broke this morning was a fellow named Jack Dorsey, who's a founder of Twitter. And he's gone public with a $1 billion gift to work on this COVID virus. And his quote is, "The needs are increasingly urgent. I want to see the impact in my lifetime. I hope this inspires others to do something similar. Life is too short. So let us do everything today to help people now. So here's a fellow that's just committed $1 billion, 1/3 of his net worth, to this cause. And so, you know, I hope that we as donors will look at something and say, is there something out there? Is there an issue, a cause, an organization that we would consider giving 1/3 of our net worth to? I don't know if Jack, I don't think he's a follower of Jesus, but it's going to be really interesting. He's going to put his gifts on a thing called Google Sheets so that the public can see and track his $1 billion of giving, which is great public accountability. But I hope that we would be inspired to step up in this economic downturn personally and find something that would really give a chance for us to contribute significantly to. So let me stop there. And I don't know how we did on time. I think we're okay on time. I'm going to turn over to Steve.
Steve, you're muted.
Done, dude. Thanks. Al, appreciate that shout out to my home church here in Franklin, Tennessee, Church of the City. We do have a satellite in New York City, and we're really excited about using online streaming. First, just let me say thank you for allowing myself and the team members of the Signatory to serve you not only during this kind of tense and uncertain time, but prior to and in an ongoing basis. We really do look at it as a privilege. And you know, our mission as an organization is to educate and facilitate revolutionary biblical generosity across the generations. And what you just heard from Al, I think is an example of that. When you're looking at 1/3 of your income, that's clearly revolutionary generosity. So what I've been asked to do today is to take a look at 3 practical things that we might do in this time that really, I think, coincide with what the scriptures have called us to do. If we follow scripture and believe that God has given us all that we have, which includes not only our treasure, but it also includes our talents and our time. So talents, treasure, and time. How can we help others through those 3 things? The first example, quite honestly, with talents is right here in my own backyard. That great looking lady there that you see on the screen is my 92-year-old mother-in-law. She's in incredible health. She lives here with us, and she has developed a really unique relationship with a little girl next door whose house is right behind her. And Abby May is 9 years old, and they spend a lot of time together. But needless to say, during this crisis, they've not been able to do that. And Abby May really had it in her heart, told her mother that she'd been praying and that she wanted to do something special for Miss Mary Jo. And so what you can see in that other picture is a window that my mother-in-law can see from her apartment. And Abby painted a stained glass mosaic, if you will, there with a heart. Probably a little hard to read in that picture, but it says, "We love you." So here's a 9-year-old who said, there's something I can do to reach out to my friend, brighten up and make her day better just by using my talents that God has given me in an artistic way. So it really touched us, really touched my mother-in-law, as you can imagine, in a major kind of a way. The next thing, let's talk about that we all have responsibility for is the treasures that God has given us to steward over. God, I think, is absolutely the best investor. I love David's comments, but you know, God's not up there fretting about his portfolio right now. He really owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and therefore he is speaking to us through prayer and through situations that come across our doorstep where he wants us to minister and serve with his assets. Right now, many of you may know of situations either in your businesses or actually could be down the street next door, could be in your community group, who knows where it may be. But God has laid on your heart that you want to be able to assist people who've maybe become unemployed and they're trying to figure out how they're going to make a payment or how they're going to continue their medical care, whatever that situation may be. And so we have teamed and have been teamed for a long time with an organization called Helping Hands. Many of you are aware of them. And they have the ability for you to make a contribution out of your donor advised fund through Helping Hands to assist some of these people in a very direct and meaningful and impactful way. And you can either do that anonymously, of course, or you can do that with visibility. That's your choice, whatever the Lord lays on your heart. But in a time like this where we all want to do something, and I think Al would agree with this, one of the things that he looks at and measures ministry by is impact. And so there's an opportunity where you can use some of God's treasures to have impact on people who are directly in your sphere of influence, and that you come in contact with, and you can actually see with your own eyes what they're doing. So I want to encourage you, if that's of interest to you, you've got people you want to reach out and help in some meaningful way, please give a call to our donor care specialists. There'll be some info at the end where you can make contact. We'll put you in touch with Helping Hands, and you can absolutely have an impact for the kingdom through your treasures. The last thing I want to talk about here that we think is pretty practical is our time. You know, right now, whether we like it or not, we're being forced to be with family. For some people, that's probably challenging. My wife would say for us who are believers, that sometimes that creates some intense fellowship moments. But all in all, it's probably really good that fathers are spending time with their children, wives are seeing their husbands around a lot more. We've really had a change of lifestyle. And so in the course of that, we begin to have conversations around family. And you see there on the slide, maybe a question of what makes a family successful. The Signatory has developed a set of unique curriculum through a workshop called Family Legacy Workshop. And you can see there that the purpose of these workshops are really to foster, through a biblically based curriculum, an opportunity to have a discussion about things like what's the real purpose of family as described in the scriptures, and how do I discover how best to communicate what God has put on my wife and my heart about how we should be charitable and how we should go about doing that, so that we teach it down through the generations. How do we as a family develop a set of a real specific vision and a mission for our family? You know, most business owners, we'd never dream of having a business where we didn't have a vision statement and a mission statement. But guys, I'm here to tell you that we often find that when it comes to families, being purposeful around having that for their own family through the generations, it just doesn't happen. And so this curriculum is designed to be really 2 half-day sessions facilitated by a Signatory leader. Typically, we put together 10 couples. It's great if you can do it in a host couple's home, and we walk through this in a very, I think, interactive but very biblically informed kind of a way. So as you're thinking during these times about kind of how's this impacting our family, this is a great opportunity to spend some time having this discussion right now, because many of us around the country are sheltered in place. We know that you can't run out and do one of these sessions tomorrow, but you can certainly spend time thinking about it and doing some planning on getting together some other couples to convene. Let us know at the Signatory if that's on your heart. You'll see at the end in our resource center an opportunity to contact us to help facilitate that. So 3 quick practical ways: talents, how to use your treasures, a real practical way, an impactful way you can use treasures, impact people in your neighborhood or your sphere of influence. And lastly of all, a consideration around your family about thinking about how can we make our family more successful than it has been in the past. We really thank you for participating today, and I'm going to throw it back to Bill.
Steve, thanks a lot. We do have some questions for the panel. We'll see how many we can get to just as we're getting ready for that. Just as an aside, even last night as a family, we did a personality profile, the lion, beaver, otter, golden retriever. And everybody did their assessments, and we had a little bit of discussion around that. So that was a lot of fun just to be able to have that kind of conversation around that. So a couple of questions kind of right away out of the gates. And let's start with one of the really practical questions. And this might be a David question. It might be a Steve, Jeff question. But here's the question from a business owner who says, look, I'm in a situation where I'm trying to balance taking care of employees, taking care of vendors, all that side of just the tough situation that I'm in. On the other hand, how do I balance that with also continuing to stay in business and the long run of potentially, maybe I've got to lay off people versus continuing on for the longer run. So who wants to tackle that? Steve, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, Bill, as a former business owner, I think this time is just such a clear example of preparing, having some funds set aside, some assets set aside for the totally unexpected. And that makes the making of these decisions gives you a lot more options to make. I think when many business owners are at a place where they don't have options that they would love to have because there's not been a preparation. By the way, I would say this also applies to many of the ministries that we have an opportunity to work with as well. So my key thing would be using the money you stored up in advance for the emergency that's at hand.
David, do you want to tackle that too?
I'd be glad to give a comment. I mean, part of it is just life is complex and you don't know the future. I'd say that again. And when you're a business owner, you're a steward for many. I mean, first a steward to God, but you're a steward for family, investors, employees, customers, and you do have to prepare for tough times ahead, and they are uncertain. So by all means, you have to be open when God says stretch and take a risk and bless people, whether it's employees or others. Balanced with sometimes it can be prudent to guard resources so you make sure you're prepared for the future. It's hard being a business owner.
Yeah, good. So here's a tough question that maybe Andy, Jeff, you guys can tackle. And it's really the verse in Proverbs says the prudent sees danger and takes refuge. On the other hand, the simple keep going and pay for it. So how would you talk to those people that say, man, we see things kind of going lower and, the factual situation doesn't look all that good. So should we or would we be preparing for a worst case scenario? What's the mindset there? How do we think about that?
Well, jumping in on that, I think it's very prudent to acknowledge and identify what the worst case scenario is and prepare for it. I just don't think we should park our car there and stay there mentally, day after day, moment for moment, which is what I had mentioned previously. There's lots of biblical wisdom around looking ahead into the future and preparing for that. There's been a lot of comments consistent on that. Again, I do think this is where it's important, though, to have other people come around you and help create a plan how to do that. Don't do that as a solo project. Get counsel in that area.
Yeah, that's good. Jeff, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, just the context of the Proverbs. The prudent person is the individual who could see the handwriting on the wall. There's situations that we look at with people and say, "Oh, dude, you so should have seen that coming." A bad relationship, spending that is absolutely out of control, and it's kind of like the foolish person just doesn't pay any attention to that and runs headlong into the middle of the mess. And the prudent person says, "Listen, this might not be. This is predictable. This has a fairly predictable trajectory, but I don't know how much I would carry that over into specific financial forecasting. That is, that there is so much, as David was saying, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. And yet, for those things that are predictable, that we can say, when relationships are run like that, we can almost guarantee that that's where they end up. When finances are run like that, we can almost guarantee that that's where this road will take you. And so I just love that proverb. And it's that the prudent person sees where roads lead, and the foolish person kind of goes, yeah, I don't care, or I'm just going to pretend like that doesn't happen.
Yeah. That's really good advice. We're not going to be able to get to all the questions, so I do want to turn to a couple wrap-up points. Some of you maybe aren't on our newsletter. Make sure you sign up on that. Some of you want information about some of this family legacy discussion. Feel free to sign up at my website. Some of you want to maybe contact our speakers. Just reach out to Hannah Reynolds, and she'll get you that information. If you have questions about the benevolence giving, then feel free to reach out to Hannah as well. Some of you have asked for copies of the slides. We're happy to send those to you as well. Again, just shoot an email back to us. And at the end of the day, let me just wrap all this up by saying, just tagging on to what Jeff just said a moment ago, we really don't know the future. We can plan the scenarios as best as we can. Worst case scenario, you know what? We're going to keep working till Jesus comes home. And that's a good thing for us, to keep on plugging away, because that's what we want to do, is we want to hasten his return. So let me pause here and just encourage you that God is good. He is going before us. He said that in his word, that he goes before us. He fights our battles for us. So stay with us, and we'll keep talking to you as we go along. But God bless you, and thanks for joining us this afternoon.